historians. Today we're going to talk about oil and the Mexican Revolution. Feel free to lay back and enjoy while we take you to and through another time in history. So before we start right in with oil, let's dive into a little bit of background. Prior to the revolution, the most important political figure in Mexico was long-standing President Porfirio Diaz. Diaz set Mexico on the path of modern capitalist economic development, and during his presidency, which was actually a dictatorship to some, Mexico had a boom to its economy. For example, there was a railroad expansion from 600 kilometers to 20,000 kilometers. Exports increased immensely by a factor of 6, and in 1895 the government had a budget surplus. By 1911, Mexico became the world's third largest oil producer with an annual production of 14 million barrels. Now, a good question to be asking yourself is, how did the oil industry come to Mexico? Well, everything began around the late 1800s and the early 1900s, when the oil business was developing in waves. New oil fields were being discovered and people rushed to those areas to seek their fortune. In the United States, these waves headed toward Oklahoma and Texas just after the turn of the century. Then they went farther and farther south into the Gulf of Mexico, despite the revolution happening around this time.
In Mexico, the oil industry began to expand during Porfirio Diaz's last years in office due to the oil field discoveries. It also began to expand because of more foreign investments and improved transportation. At first, Mexico's internal market wasn't able to improve or contribute that much to the private Mexican petroleum economy. Some production and sales of oil had failed. In order for these sales to succeed, the industry had to be controlled by people with technology, management skills, and money. In other words, only foreigners that had experience in the oil industry could control it so that it could work better.
People like entrepreneurs, skilled workers, and geologists from the United States were committed to bring Mexican oil production to a point of success, and this was something they would achieve by the year 1921, when 25.2% of the total world production of oil was done in Mexico. But prior to this, the United States had invested around $51,900,000 in 1911, and 10 years later, that investment would become $819,600,000.
Henry Clay Pierce and Edward Doheny were some American businessmen who became interested in Mexico's oil industry. Edward Doheny, who was a U.S. investor, discovered a reserve in San Luis Potosi. Therefore, Edward was provided with assistance by the government so that the reserve could be used and be successful.
By the year 1911, the U.S. dominated the oil industry in Mexico, and Doheny was becoming very rich because of it. So President Diaz was now scared that the United States was creating a monopoly of the oil industry in a country that was not even theirs. You have to understand that the oil was crucial for the United States and their participation throughout World War I, meaning that they had to keep a good relationship with Mexico. But to prevent the US from controlling the industry way too much, Diaz did the following. He gave British engineer Sir Weetman Pearson a lot of privileges to get oil fields and infrastructure. He gave him large allowances on oil development, a 50-year contract for Veracruz, free exportation of oil, free importation of equipment, and he put a limit on both state and federal taxes.
With all of these privileges given to the foreigners, sadly, local Mexican entrepreneurs felt like they couldn't compete with foreign entrepreneurs anymore, and the American businessmen didn't see Mexican entrepreneurs as a competition. Americans' oil businessmen instead saw the British as their competition, and the British greatest competition was Sir Weetman Pearson. Doheny and Pearson were the ones who controlled the most of the industry.
Diaz's political men supported all of the foreign oil businessmen. However, they showed a greater interest and support to Sir Weetman Pearson. You see, with all of the privileges that were given to Pearson, He created El Águila Oil Company. Thanks to the creation of Weedman's company, he was able to build the first ever oil refinery in Mexico and controlled half of the oil developments that belonged to the foreign investors. This took away a bit of the control that the US had over the oil industry and gave more control to the British. However, Diaz's attempt on limiting the control the United States had over the oil industry created tension between Mexico and the US, which was a problem. Also, the Waters Pierce Oil Company greatly controlled the petroleum industry during Diaz's presidency. This connected to another problem. That was that the industry became very large and more workers from different regions of Mexico came to work on it. They worked in very extreme conditions and were treated badly, which created resentment and indignation among the workers, and this also led to the start of the revolution.
It was believed that American investments were even more valuable than those of Mexicans in their own country. By the end of this decade, the oil industry had helped pay for the Mexican Revolution. This industry was unique in the sense that most of the other businesses were not thriving in Mexico during the revolution, but the oil industry was, mainly because it was controlled by foreigners. So, thanks to the oil business and its great profits, it helped fund the revolution through the use of taxes, forced loans, and theft.
Despite the success of the oil business, these fields were dangerous places to be in. During the revolution, the different factions like Villistas and Carrancistas fought in these fields. Foreign oil companies feared that these fights would cause economic and environmental catastrophes. But companies weren't just used as battlegrounds. All sides of the revolution demanded supplies from the oil business, and the foreign oil companies always tried to satisfy them by complying. Now, during these times in the revolution, a number of American workers were killed in ambushes by revolutionaries or people from the different revolutionary factions in the Chijol Canal, which was used to carry money like payroll or pay off leases. In conclusion, the oil industry played a huge role in the Mexican Revolution. Whether it was by causing it or it being used as a source of financing, it is seen all over the place. Now, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask, and I hope you learned a lot about oil and the Mexican Revolution in this video.